Greetings, everyone, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening where you might be ingesting this particular webinar, welcome. My name is Derek Johnson. I'm with Aurora WDC. I'm really privileged and honored to be with my good friend, fellow Scott Leeb today for competitive intelligence, leveraging big data and knowledge management to produce results. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Derek.
Great to partner up with you on this awesome topic. So a little bit about me. I'll share a little bit more in a minute, but proud supporter, advocate of SLA now for many years. Scott and I were just recounting how we sort of got to know each other in many of the different SLA conferences that have occurred over the years, and certainly we all hope that an in-person option might return to us in 2022. Looking forward to a jam session today on this topic with you, Scott, and just this phenomenal topic being led by such a great communicator and intel leader in yourself. So thanks for making time in your busy schedule. A few quick plugs. So the SLA competitive intelligence community, I encourage you to look for opportunities to get involved. Always when you get involved, there's a little bit more of a vested interest in the outcome. And I'm going to give you a few of those different ways to do that here in just a few minutes. Aurora WDC, our firm, is a longtime supporter of SLA. We've been to many of the conferences. We've been running this webinar series, proud sponsor of this series now for many years, and we continue to look for more opportunities to deepen our interests in SLA and this great community. As we move forward to the next slide, I want to make a few quick alerts about upcoming events. So the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows, which Scott and I are both proud members, is having a virtual summit. Starts next Wednesday, in fact, so October 27th and 28th. It's a virtual summit. What that really means is it's a panoply of speakers that really aren't on the typical speaking circuit. It's a summit, not a conference, which also means that you as participants are going to be formulating the ideas and processes and outcomes and standards that are going to be contributing to driving this profession forward. So in the chat window, I'm going to give you a link to gain all access to this two-day event for a mere $150. Apologies for that. By using a trust ticket link that our firm Aurora WDC is willing to share with you. So check the chat pane for that, and please do check it out. November Competitive Intelligence Community Webinar. That's still a TBD. We're actually still, if you have good speakers that you want to see considered for this, please forward them to Liz, and stay tuned for some announcements about the November webinar coming soon. So guys, as we go to the next slide, these leadership opportunities that people have within SLA are numerous. So are you interested in doing more than just attending a webinar, strengthening your leadership skills and being part of what's driving the CI community forward? Here's some open roles for 2022 that we invite you to check out. Chair-elect, communications lead, membership chair, and authors and editors for the newsletter. Some awesome opportunities to grow professionally, strengthen your skills, and see this community around SLA move forward. If you want some more information about that, I'm told that you can contact Phil Britton. Phil is the president of SLA CI community, and his email will also be in the chat pane. Thank you, Liz, for sharing that. As we go forward to the next slide, this is where Scott and I had a little bit of fun prepping for today. So it's my and Scott's understanding that this particular quote was about one of our colleagues. I'm not going to name the name, but he apparently got very high remarks and marks coming out of his SLA webinar that he did. Scott, I've taken a little bit of a different spin on this quote. Rather than reading you this quote, I'm going to read to you what I've written up that I think people are going to say about your session today. So I'm going to forecast what people are going to say about your remarks today as follows. Scott challenged my assumptions about the intersection of competitive intelligence, big data, and knowledge management, and caused me to be more informed about the potential for stronger linkages within these areas at my company. So, if you get some derivation of that, I would say you've done your job today, and we'll invite you to come back. Fair enough?
Fair enough. Thanks.
Awesome. And final quick little reminder for some live tweeting as we go forward to this next slide. Hashtag CIC webinar. Get your comments out there. That's what drives the social interaction with webinars like this in today's world. And please do keep these networks alive and lively. Keep the conversation going. So a little bit about Scott as we move to this final slide before you take over, Scott. I'd be remiss if I didn't say these two things about Scott before we get into his bio. Number one, he's my Malkovich doppelganger twin. I'm going to put on Twitter a picture, I haven't found it yet, but I know I have it, of me and Scott side by side with a little picture of John Malkovich in the middle. Look for that coming out on Twitter within the next hour or two. And number two, if you aren't ready for it, Scott Leeb has a handshake that will literally crush your hand. So if you ever get the opportunity in person to shake Scott's hand, just be prepared, get your hand in there really fast and firm, and things will go well for you. So Scott, over the last 20 years or so, you've created, managed, and grown a number of different global business intelligence and knowledge management programs at least 4 different Fortune 500 companies, also a leading international philanthropy, Rockefeller Foundation, and now, of course, a global law firm, Fragaman. You've advised international governments and other federal government bureaus and so on these knowledge management areas too. You've spoken in pretty much every continent of the world. I'll invite you to call out anywhere you have not had some physical presence over your 20 years of doing this. And you got your start in the U.S. Army as a senior intelligence analyst. So what more would you like to share about your background with our great audience today, Scott?
No, you've covered it well, and I think sadly until penguins need some CI, I'm going to miss out on that continent. But as you said, everywhere else I've had the privilege of speaking on this, and I'm really looking forward to chatting today with this group and of course the rich Q&A to follow.
Yeah, right on. Well, let's roll right into it. Off to you.
All right. Well, thanks much. Thanks, Derek. And you set the bar high. Hopefully, I can meet the expectations. And I'm looking forward today to talking about competitive intelligence, big data, and knowledge management, which are really the three areas that I've focused on for the past 25 years or so. The plan is to spend about 40 minutes chatting with you, but then leave plenty of time for Q&A. Also, I firmly believe that the questions should be answered in context. So Derek will be monitoring the Q&A, and please, Derek, feel free to interrupt me as you see fit, and we'll address the questions, or we can address them at the end. So with that, let's begin. Yeah, I want to start on a high note and why I think this is the golden age of competitive intelligence. I've been involved in CI for the past 2+ decades, and I really think the prospects for success for the CI function have never been higher. So there's a quote I use now that I'm really trying to find who first stated it and give them credit, but I haven't been able to. So as of now, I'll take it as my own. And that is the first casualty in any crisis is clarity. And I think during these uncertain times, this has been just an excellent opportunity for the CI function to shine. I mean, I hate to say if there's any plus side out of the pandemic, but it has been one in which we've been able to make ourselves known by providing sort of this clarity where chaos exists. I mean, whether it's our personal lives or professional lives, COVID-19 has turned it upside down. And it's during these times that people look for the clarity. And it's the competitive intelligence function that provides those insights and that clarity. So, in talking with colleagues, they've just had, wonderful opportunities for exposure to be seen and heard within, their organization or broader group. So, it is a great time, in my view, to be in competitive intelligence. And, this quote, I think, rings as true today as it did 2,500 years ago when Sun Tzu said, "Know thy enemy, know thyself, and 1,000 battles will be yours." In thinking about that, I mean, we operate in an environment with a high degree of uncertainty, whether it's the political, economic, the cultural, technological, legal, regulatory. People need to know what's going on, what's next. I mean, that's one of the biggest questions I get. What's coming down the pike, what's happening, and this is what CI professionals were built for. So it's perfect for that, and that's why part of the reason I think it's just a golden age for competitive intelligence. So I mean, look, I'll talk about data overload in a minute, but we live in an era where we have data overload, but just intelligence scarcity. And the data overload, what is one thing competitive intelligence professionals do? We know how to vet sources, we know how to evaluate sources, we know how to look at data and determine what's valuable and what's not. And that's so important these days. And the intelligence scarcity, what we do is sense making. We look at this complex environment we operate in, and we provide a situational awareness, whether it's what the competition's doing, how markets are moving, what's happening with the legal and regulatory environment. These are all huge question marks that we provide answers to. I like to say that there's plenty of the what out there, but the so what, the what next, the what if, the what now, the why, that's what we're missing, and that's what the competitive intelligence professional is there to do and help with. So it's for these reasons that I think we really are in a golden age of competitive intelligence. So with that high note, let me now turn towards the agenda of talking about what big data and knowledge management. So it's important to understand what big data is and why big data is a big deal. How knowledge management then optimizes big data. But the bottom line is, it's competitive intelligence that really brings it all together with the sense making. And then I wanted to conclude with just some practical steps for success for CI professionals. So big data. Here are some of the traditional definitions of big data. The first one talks about, well, big data is, yes, a very large data set, and it helps us understand patterns and trends. Okay. The second one tells us that, it's about structured and unstructured data. And this is important because 80 to 90% of the data out there, as you know, is unstructured. And so big data addresses the unstructured data, such as emails, text, and pictures, presentations. Big data also, in the third definition, isn't just traditional sources, it's non-traditional sources like social media, tweets, Facebook posts and such. But perhaps the best definition I've seen is the last one, where it basically says that big data is simply data that's so big it can't be processed using traditional methods. I've heard someone say that big data is any data that doesn't fit on a spreadsheet. Well, a spreadsheet now can contain up to 1,046,000 rows. So again, it gives you a sense of how big data is. Sometimes big data you look at, you think of the statistics. I like this first statistic: 1.7 megabytes of new information is created every second for every human being. 7.8 billion humans, that's 13 billion megabytes of new information every second. Or put another way, in the time it took me to explain that data point, about 150 billion megabytes of information have been created. Just incredible amounts of numbers, and you see some of the other statistics here. But perhaps the most important one, I think, for us is this last one, that as you look at data, less than 0.5% of all data is ever analyzed and used. So that means of 200 data points, only one is ever used or analyzed. Just think about if you could increase that to just double that to 1% or even 2%, the types of insights that can be gleaned. I mean, as a competitive intelligence professional, you always hear it's about timely, actionable intelligence. Well, taking more than 0.5% of all the data and being able to analyze it and use it certainly would allow you to develop those timely, actionable insights. So the way I think about big data is along the five V's: volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value. First is the volume. You know, when I was in college, and this dates me a bit, you know, I had an Apple computer, 20 meg hard drive, and I thought I had everything I needed. I could play games, I could put all my schoolwork on. But I mean, think about it. We've gone from megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes, exabytes, zettabytes, yottabytes, zenatabytes, shalentnobytes, and now we're up to something called domagroma bytes, which is one with 33 zeros after it. I mean, we're just simply creating words to kind of capture the size of the data that's out there. Velocity. I mean, you see this right now, where we could be thousands of miles away, yet we're talking real time. For those in the financial services, you know, there are opportunities, arbitrage opportunities. You save milliseconds. You can make millions of dollars by shaving milliseconds off response time. Just amazing. Variety. When I put this slide deck together, and I went to hit save, I had 17 different options that I could save this as. In a Word document, 19 different options. And that's not to talk at all about pictures or video, audio files in all the various formats. So just a variety of different formats. Veracity. You know, it's a big question now. Is there's so much, as they used to say, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And really understanding the truth of what the data is that's out there. There used to be a needle in a haystack. Now there's multiple needles in the haystack, and you need to be able to determine which one is of highest value. And that leads to the last point, value. And that's where I want to show where CI comes in. The big data is the stuff. The knowledge management is managing the stuff, but it's the competitive intelligence that actually turns it into value. And I said there were two other V's. There's variation. So what is variation? Well, variation is if I go in the morning to my bakery and I have 3 choices of muffins. So the variety is the 3 choices, but the variation is on Monday I'll get a muffin, nice and moist. Maybe by Wednesday the baker's getting a little tired. It's a little dry. So that's the variation, and this is important with big data. I'll give a perfect example I just saw the other day. If I said to you, "Oh, that's great," or "Oh, that's great," that's a very positive statement. But if you said something to me and I said, "Oh, that's great," you know, that's a negative to mildly negative statement. It's the same 3 words, but it's kind of the variation in the tone and such. And there's tools now that social sentiment tools can pick up whether it's a positive statement or a negative statement. The other item that we're talking about is visualization. Now, visualization is, you know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, in my view, an infographic's worth 1,000 pictures. The ability to tell, you know, to see those pictures and really show how the information plays out is so critical in this day. So that's a little bit about the big data. I now, you know, a couple examples of big data at work. Law enforcement. You know, I recently found out that crime is a lot like earthquakes, and that they have defined aftershocks. And in law enforcement, if a crime occurs in one area, there's aftershocks. Crime is likely to occur in that area again. And so by looking at big data, large police forces are able to tell where crime's going to occur, when it's going to occur, and allocate resources directly. Military application, that ship you're looking at there has no people on it. It is entirely run by computers. Now, just think about if that's a ship navigating the Sydney Harbor. You know, there's something called coal regs, which are the maritime laws of the sea that says you have to give certain distance and certain priority to ships. Understanding that, understanding geolocation, where you are relative to others, is just huge. And so you can imagine the amount of data that goes into keeping a ship like that running, and it can go for days on end without any human intervention. Crowdsourcing. After the Boston Marathon incident and MH370, which was the crash of the plane going from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, people asked the public for information. In the case of Boston, 3 million people sent in pictures that they had taken during that day, and FBI was able to put together a picture that really helped them find the perpetrators of that crime. And finally, the Netflix case, content development. There was a show that was on for a while. Many of you remember House of Cards. Netflix knew that it would be a winner, putting David Fincher, the director, together with Kevin Spacey. Because of past records, they knew that the project would be a winner right away, and they were able to invest huge amounts of money and know that to some degree their return would be there. And of course, House of Cards was a big success for the 6 seasons. It was on the air, but and Netflix didn't have to go through the usual audience testing and pilots and such, because they were able just to mine big data to get them that information. I mean, the real key benefits of the big, yeah.
Scott, you asked for questions, so I'm gonna
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
We have a good one in from Jonathan Dunnett. You mentioned predictive law enforcement. It's highly fraught with issues and negatives. Care to address that?
Yeah, again, one of the big issues around the big data is the privacy issue. How much, how invasive is it? And I was just going to talk about a case here where Target, was using data, and they were in fact predicting if people were pregnant, because they would be pushing to them diaper coupons and things like that. And they were taken to task, and they were came under a lot of heat for doing that. And it's a huge area. In 2012, March of 2012, the big data of Barack Obama came out with a big data initiative. It took till 2016 to put together a strategy. But in the strategy, one of the big issues was around the responsibly using the data and really setting up parameters for how the data can be used both legally and ethically. And with the law enforcement, that's a concern, but there's also, you have to weigh that against the public safety issues as well. So it's a constant battle, and it's a very thin line of how much, what data to use. And as you well know, as CI professionals, we follow strong ethical guidelines, but there's opportunities with data and data collection to really push that into gray and sometimes black areas. So it is a huge concern. So I talked here about new decision making, better decision making. I always wondered why, when I was in the kitchen and I dropped a piece of bread, it always ended up butter side down. I also have always wondered how it was that when I'm on Amazon, they make such good recommendations for things to buy. And it's because of, it's because of big data. It's because how they mine the data, how they find information about what you're looking at, what you're buying, when you're buying products. It allows companies like Home Depot and Lowe's for this just-in-time inventory to make sure that that they know they don't need to order 6,000 snow blowers in October. They only need 2,000 in October, and then another surge in November or December. So it allows for better decision making. New products and services. There are actually billboards now that change according to real-time challenges. So for example, if you are in heavy traffic, they know that they can put greater text up on the billboard, because you're basically sitting in traffic and you can read it, as opposed to at 3 a.m. when you're zipping along 70, 80 miles an hour. They need to find something that can very quickly catch the eye. And so, just some of these huge benefits from big data that that can be realized.
Scott,
But
while you're still on that slide, another
yeah,
good question just came in from Charlotte. One of the issues with big data is that it embodies the bias of the questioner or the question asker. How does that get addressed?
yeah. So I mean, that's one of the key things about and why competitive intelligence is so important, because the last bit is the analysis. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And you're right, whether it's Ben Galad's blind spots or the bias, that's what you need to think about and address. We'll talk a bit about the difference, with all this data, suddenly interesting correlations appear. But there's a huge difference, as we know, between correlation and causation. So, this is where the competitive intelligence professional can shine. There's so much data out there. There's so much stuff, and finding that nugget. I mean, that's what we're trained to do. That's what's in our DNA, and we'll talk a bit about that as we go through the next section. So knowledge management. I often, both of my daughters at some point have come to me and said, kind of, Dad, what is it that you do? And I said, well, I work in knowledge management, and I sort of try and explain it to them, and you get the Migo effect. My eyes glaze over. So what I did was I said, okay, think of it this way. You go into a library. You go to the front desk and say, I'd like a Fodor's guide on such and such. A good librarian will tell you, oh, that's the 9/11 section. That's where you'll find the travel books. You go down to the left, make a right, and there it is. So that's what your dad does. I basically do what they do at the library. I organize it, all the information, because you don't walk into the library and the librarian just says, yeah, it's back there, and there's just piles and piles of books. So with big data, I mean, it needs to be organized and thought about in a logical way, and that's what, in essence, knowledge management does. You'll recognize this. This is from Best Buy, looking at a computer. On the left-hand side, you have what's called a faceted search, where you say, I'd like operating system X, screen size Y, so much, such a size graphics card. And the reason you can do that is because each of these the computers, they have metadata. They have data in there about what the size of the screen is. So you can sort of say, if this, then this, and it shows what's there. So knowledge management helps organize all this information. It makes it easier to find and navigate. And so you have the big data, which is just stuff. And now you have knowledge management, which helps with organized stuff. So where does competitive intelligence play in? So you have structured, unstructured data, internal and external. So you have all this data coming in. Well, that's your big data. That's your stuff. Then you have the knowledge management, the funnel, helping make sense of it, putting it in order, putting it structured so you can search for it. But you still don't have anything of use. People can't act on stuff. They can act on insights in the analysis. And this is where the competitive intelligence professional comes in. So you begin to see that, big data and knowledge management, understanding the big data, using knowledge management, these are great accelerators, what we used to in the military call force multipliers for competitive intelligence. Perhaps the best way to show this is talking about comparing big data to oil and the critical last mile. So in the 1880s, people found all this black sludge in the earth, oil, but it didn't, and you had ways to extract it, and that's big data. That's pulling out information. But it didn't do any good just sitting in the earth. So you had to transport it somewhere. That's the knowledge management piece, taking it, organizing it, putting it in a way that can be, in essence, processed. And then competitive intelligence is the refinery. You take, you're pulling this sludge out of the earth, you're moving it to a refinery. Then once it goes to the refinery, it powers our lives. It powers our cars. It provides light in our homes. goes into plastics, detergents. The same holds true in, as we think in business. Big data, and that's about getting information, collecting information, it's extracting it. The knowledge management is the collection, the organization, the transportation of it. And then the competitive intelligence is the transformation. We always talk about timely, actionable intelligence. Here's where the rubber meets the road. You're actually turning it into something useful. Business decisions, help with strategic planning. We talk about that critical last mile. That refers to goods, where it's that last bit, bringing it from the creator to your home. You often hear about it in telecommunications. The last mile is that last bit that gets the internet signal into your house from that the local node into your house. Well, competitive intelligence is that critical last mile. Without the CI, doesn't matter how fast your internet is, how much big data is pushed through it, how it's managed, how it's sent to that last node. If it doesn't make the last node, if it doesn't come into your home, it's of little use. So, big data and knowledge management are certainly accelerators and necessary for competitive intelligence, but you could have all the big data and great knowledge management, but without the competitive intelligence function, sense making around it and turning it into something useful, there's no value. I will also talk here for a second about technology. A lot of talk about technology and kind of, is it replacing the competitive intelligence professional? I remember SLA conference a number of years ago. The theme was the rise of Google, whither the librarian. And it's, as I see it, the technology still can't bring it that last mile. You might cut that critical last mile to the last kilometer or the last meter, but still that last bit has to be done by the professional, the competitive intelligence person, the person who can put critical thinking and analytic skills to this information. Now, the tools can make it much more easier. They can parse through the data. They can provide it to you. There's tools like Tableau that kind of bring it to your doorstep, and then it's your job to convert it into insights. But the technology is not replacing us. It's merely making our lives easier if used smartly. So now let me turn to sort of the essential elements for success. What I see is the 5 key elements, and again, this is where what's in our DNA is tailor-made for the current environment we work in, and part of the reason why I said it's such a golden age for competitive intelligence. So there's a term many of you have heard, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. I think of my phone, and I think of all the data that's on here. In fact, you may or may not know it, but this phone has more computing power than all the computers in the NASA center that put the first man on the moon. Just incredible amounts of power in your phone. But what happens when, with my daughter, you put more and more game apps on your phone? Well, it slows down. Same holds true with organizations. More and more data coming in. And part of the problem is storage is so cheap. So the theory is, well, we'll just collect everything and then we'll make sense around it. I'm going to put up the requisite slide that always has to be up in every CI presentation, the intelligence cycle. And as we know from the intelligence cycle, one of the things is looking at requirements, asking the right questions, making sure that you're not just collecting everything in sight, but really have a focus on what is the right data to be collected. And it's a mix. It's proprietary data, public data, and the analytics that really help with the actionable insights. But this is where companies fail. In fact, 55% of big data efforts fail because there's no collection strategy in place. Yet that's in our DNA as well. Doing the collection right, making sure you've vetted the sources, getting the right sources. And again, there's there's technology tools out there to help with that, but you know, it's something which we know how intuitively know how to do. But in this day and age, with all the information out there, it's just not simply not getting done. And look, the environment's changing quickly. We all know sources change, traditional, non-traditional. Some today were a good source, some not so good, and then tomorrow it flip-flops. There's tools out there, visualization, predictive analytics, reporting. You know, the data is getting bigger and bigger. The tools are getting better and better. Our computational capabilities are increasing. Exascale computing is, a million calculations a second. We're moving towards being able to do that. We haven't yet. We were hoping by 2020 to be able to do that, but you know, the ability to crunch through numbers is just getting greater and greater. And then, you know, no longer when you have huge data can you just analyze it piece by piece. You have to break it into sets and then develop models and techniques to do that. And all this, you know, all this is constantly changing the technology. So organizations need to dedicate resources to monitor and respond to the changing environment. Now, doesn't that sound similar? What do we do as competitive intelligence professionals? Well, we dedicate resources to monitor and respond to this changing environment. It might be, you know, the competition. It might be a legal and regulatory change. It might be a business change, but this is what, you know, we are built for this. And you know, and look, it's not a simple world. This is the big data landscape. This gentleman puts this out every year or so, looking at all the various pieces to it. But as you as a CI professional, you'll look at something the competitor's doing, and you might act on it, you might not. So too is the case when you look at this information. It's not saying go after the shiny object every time, but sometimes changes need to be made. So you need to be vigilant. It's important to look at the landscape. Expanding our skill set. It is important to note that big data is just not little data on a larger scale. Big data requires big skills, and these big skills are new skills. You know, there's a new breed of analytics specialists where you have to have statistical techniques, applied mathematical methods, machine learning algorithms, data visualization, and then business and communication skills. And you know, they say that today, that probably 10% of the jobs 10 years from now don't even exist today. And you know, it used to be just scientists. Now you're data scientists, engineers, social sentiment analysts. All these new jobs are out there. And in fact, I mentioned a strategy that came out in 2016, the Obama strategy, big data strategy. A full section was dedicated to how we need to be able to have the right skills in place, whether it's at the college level teaching it or professionally within organizations to have that skill set. But what is, in my view, most interesting is, as you think about it, this is what competitive intelligence professionals already have from a skill set standpoint. Think of the intelligence cycle. Much of this work is things that we already have in our tool set. So the analogy, although it's not perfect, I think of, let's say you're a baseball player. We're not asking you to, I apologize for all this beeping, sorry. We're not asking you to do open heart surgery. It's the difference between, say, a baseball player and a, a cricket player. So, you know, both bats hit balls, you run, you score runs, you go from base to base, you try and catch the ball for outs. Yes, the sports are different, but it's sort of within the realm of what your skill set is. Certainly, you could, there's training and lessons, how to be a better player. And so too, I think this is with competitive intelligence professionals. You look at what's needed in this new age, this new skill set that we talk about, whether it's planning and direction, the information storage and processing. It's just on a different level, but it's all things which we intuitively know how to do and are skilled in doing. It's like learning, I always say it's like learning a new computer language. If you learn a computer language, there's underlying logic that you need to know, and it's just about sort of changing the syntax for the various languages. In some sense, that's what we have here as competitive intelligence professionals. What's our skill set? Our skill set to be able to process this big data and use it in the most useful way and turn it into timely, actionable intelligence. We have that core skill set. It's about learning some of the nuances of big data. I can't tell you how many times I've given presentation or heard competitive intelligence presentations. You talk about silo busting, sharing information, breaking down boundaries. Well, one thing I've learned is data is like water. It finds the path of least resistance into your organization. It could be in strategy, it could be in engineering, finance. And the problem is people quite simply get seduced by big data. They see the information and they start acting on it and start coming to conclusions without having a full picture. And so, it's so important, the outreach and the sharing of information. And, as a competitive intelligence professionals, one of the first things we're taught is kind of the outreach, the collaboration and such. And so kind of that sharing of information is so critical and so important. The last point I wanted to touch on is about thinking differently. In 2004, a couple of guys named Sergey Brin and Larry Page had an IPO for a company called Google. And in it, they said, we want our people 10% of their time to spend on things outside of their normal work. Now, as soon as this came out, Peter Drucker had a heart attack because as a management guru, he was like, wait a minute, how can you be telling your people you only want 90% efficiency? That's ridiculous. That will never work as a model. But if you look at Google over the past 17 years of its existence, AdSense, Google Mail, Google Earth, Google Maps, all came out of that 10% thinking. They were onto something about thinking differently. You can raise questions now, the why. We can now get the answers to the why, as opposed to, as a parent, you would tell your daughter when they ask why, well, that's how it is. Well, now we can answer with certainty why this is happening. We can see patterns uncovered, correlations observed. But to the point raised earlier, it's important to understand the difference between correlation and causation. So for example, if you look at the rise in temperature, climate change over the past 200 years, if that graph looks like this, a graph that looks exactly the same is the disappearance of pirates over that time. And now nobody's arguing that the disappearance of pirates has led to global warming. I mean, it just so happens that those two data points are correlated. And it's that type of information, and there's many, many examples of that. In New York City, there's a correlation between the cost of a subway token or a subway ticket and the increase in the price of a slice of pizza. They both look exactly the same, but those just happen to be correlated, not an issue of causation. And so, with so much data out there, you have people manipulating the data, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Numbers appear, and you see this all the time in the media. And we're trained to think and look critically at that, and think about how best to kind of parse through all that. And so, one of the points I'm trying to make throughout this presentation is this rise of big data is tailor-made for talk about correlation, a rise in the value of competitive intelligence, because you need these skills to really turn big data into big knowledge, and it's competitive intelligence professionals that do that. I had the opportunity when I was working for the U.S. government to head their long-range strategic planning. So I did all the U.S. Army's war games. And two people I always invited to the table. I invited academics and science fiction writers, because they were untethered from reality. They could think differently, think outside the box. They could solve problems and think about unique ways. And I think that's a core skill of the competitive intelligence professional, because at our hearts, we're investigative journalists, and we're always asking why something is, what's the reason behind it, and such. And so you need to think differently. So over the past 40 minutes or so, I've tried to paint a picture of why competitive intelligence is a golden age for competitive intelligence, and then support it with a look at the trend of big data and knowledge management, and how those two forces are extremely important for the competitive intelligence professional, and allow us to really do our job better, do our function better, and really to shine. So with that, let me stop there, and Derek, I'll turn it over to you for any questions.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you, Scott, for a lot of great content you have there. I wrote one down that you just mentioned. Data is like water. Finds the path of least resistance into your organization. Then I go back to your oil example, and I think competitive intelligence is the refinery. And I think that that's the point you're trying to make with this topic, right? Is all of us as Intel professionals, we have to be the refinery for all the data that flows in like water into our organizations in that regard.
And not only do we have to be it, but the functions, the organizations don't survive without it. You can have all the greatest information flowing in, but as you saw, 55% of those projects, they go nowhere, because people don't, they don't collect the information properly, and then B, once they collect it, they have no idea how to sense make around it, because they're not using it right. And again, that's what we were built for.
That's right. Number of good questions I want to make sure we get time for. So Scott, are you familiar with a tool or platform called Hadoop? H-A-D-O-O-P?
I am.
What are your thoughts of it as a tool, and do you know any alternatives or competitors of that platform? That's a good question. By the way, thank you, Samuel Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Samuel. No, I'm familiar with it. It is a great source, a great tool. Yeah, I mean, and one thing about it is it's constantly improving. I mean, you're seeing a lot of rise of the kind of the user generate, the collaborative tools. And so, Hadoop is one where, it's constantly improving, constantly being added to, and such. And so it's it's a great tool, and it's withstands the test of time, because when shortcomings are observed, kind of the wisdom of the crowd of people using it are able to say, okay, this is how we address it. Newer modules come out, and new improvements to it always. So this sort of crowdsourced type tool, I think, is extremely best, and probably the best tool out there for looking at big data. I will say, when I gave this presentation a number of years ago, it used to be much more difficult to use. If you've used it over time, it's it really was originally used several years ago only by people with a high technical knowledge. Now it's getting greater and greater use among mainstream. I mean, it's almost like a Tableau, kind of an out-of-the-box tool you can just pop up and use.
Awesome. Our fellow Cynthia Chen Correa writes this question. Thank you for the kind words, by the way, Cynthia. Great to see you too here on the webinar. Cynthia writes, big data is optimized in robust, skills-rich, and resource-rich environments. However, I see many of the information and Intel practitioners facing resource constraints, in other words, budget, staffing, time. What recommendations do you have for practitioners who want to do more with big data under those constraints and where and how do you recommend our colleagues begin?
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. It's great to hear from you. Yeah, I mean, look, that's a challenge. Tools, the tools out there as they're evolving help with that. But it's also, I think, from the CI standpoint, there's also a change management and communication. I would argue that those organizations where you're seeing the most acute problems are probably the ones where they say, oh, we'll just collect everything and sense make around it. It's about understanding, really starting at the beginning, looking at the problems that you're looking to tackle, and then tracking through and asking the right questions and focusing the effort at the start. Because I think, as was famously said, if you don't know where you're going, any route will take you there. You need to be focused at the start, looking and really helping your organization understand that the use of big data is not just wantonly collecting everything because you can, and then kind of throwing it all in a quote unquote big hopper and making sense around it. But it's about creating strategies and capabilities and thinking within your organization that why am I collecting this, and then helping that, and where you can help them with, are these the right sources and such. So I think that whereas look, resourcing is always a problem, it really runs amok when you don't manage the expectations and set the right priorities at the beginning. And that's where competitive intelligence can help with, at the front end, sort of building the right, working with your IT teams, building data strategy collection, and really making sure that topics stay on focus.
Excellent. Another good one in from Samuel. Recognizing that a lot of the skills are transferable to different positions, how should information pros in different areas, medical libraries, military librarians, DAM librarians, think about implementing this in their environments?
Yeah, again, it's interesting. I've done a lot of work during my consulting days in, people would say, oh, am I too late to the big data, to jump on this? And I tell them, that's not the question. The question is it too early? Is your organization mature enough to understand kind of how to use big data? And look, that's not easy, and it's the tendency is, oh, big data, run, collect, we have to put big data strategy in place. But you need to understand kind of what big data is. You need to understand, collection is one piece, but you need to have the knowledge management infrastructure, and you need to have the processing horsepower at the back end and the people in place. So it's really about the organization, looking at the organization and understanding its maturity level from a kind of from a knowledge management standpoint. Is the organization able to ingest vast amounts of information, and is it able to store it and present it in ways that are of the highest value? And it's only that last piece, to turning it into something, it's the most important, but perhaps the least significant to think about when thinking about big data. There's the bigger questions of making sure the company, the organization, the military unit is mature enough and has the right infrastructure in place to handle it.
Yeah, right on. We have time for one or two more questions, and we have those in the queue. Any other questions that you're looking to get in here to our audience, please get them in the chat pane. I'm going to make one more plug for next week. Wouldn't necessarily ordinarily do this, but the title of this Competitive Intelligence Fellows Summit next week, In Technology We Trust. And it isn't an exclamation point after that, it's a question mark. So in technology we trust, and I think it's a really provocative question for us to ask ourselves. And Liz is going to be putting that Trust Aurora 150 link in the chat window for you. And
I will say, Derek, we learned in the government the term trust but verify, and that's what I would, as you think about that trust, yes, trust with a healthy degree of skepticism.
That's right, brother. Michael Newgarden has a good question here. The only book that I know that deals with both knowledge management and competitive intelligence is Helen Rothberg's. She shows that while both have similarities, they actually have opposing target functions. KM wants more knowledge sharing across the organization, while CI typically restricts knowledge sharing. Any thoughts or comments on that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the belief that, as we talked about the silo busting, that, and I've spoken on this in the past, it should, knowledge, you should start with, if you're with knowledge, you should start with the assumption you share with everybody and then restrict according to, there might be legal reasons, there might be sensitive issue reasons, but I've always believed that you start with the idea that it should be broadly shared, because you just simply don't know what else a value for information is taking place in the rest of the organization, and you should you just simply don't know, and so the goal would be to share as broadly as possible. I mean, you're operating for a company. It's for the benefit of the company. It's for the benefit of the organization. And so I'm a big fan of making sure that the information that you have is shared as broadly as possible. And in knowledge management, big data is a perfect example of that. There's going to be with so much information flowing around, there's going to be pockets of extremely valuable knowledge throughout your organization. And part of it is, as a CI professional, is sleuthing and finding out where those pockets of information are and connecting the dots. The CI is about connecting the dots, and with big data, the dots are all over the place.
That's right. Well, that brings us, unless I'm missing something, Liz, Austin in the background, any other questions? I think I've hit them all. Scott, I've got, I'm wondering, you mentioned the year you were in college, you had a 20 meg Apple device.
Yeah.
And then you started to explain for us all the different sort of upgrades on those storage, macros from there. Can you give our audience that one more time? What did it go from meg to?
Yeah, so you go from meg to giga to tera to peta to exa to zeta to yoda to zenata to shalentno byte, and then this domagroma byte, which is one with 33 zeros after it. I've seen some, and it's funny, some of these ones out there, they're changing the names of, and I'm sure they have one, ones now with 36, 39, 42 zeros after it, but it's just, yeah, I mean, you're just kind of running out of names for all of these. I mean, we used to heard, it used to be a terabyte drive, you could buy in a store, and it was prohibitively expensive. But just think how, part of this whole thing is storage is so cheap. And so people, sort of kick it down the pike and say, well, I'll just store everything on my this hard drive. We'll pull down all this information, we'll store it here, and we'll sense make around it. But the more you collect, the more those nuggets are lost, and you just need, a refined collection strategy. And it's and too many organizations don't have it.
A domo byte? Did I get that right?
It's domagroma byte. It's I will send it around to everyone, but yeah, it's I wish they had just call it the DM byte, make it easier, but domagroma byte.
Yeah, sounds like something straight out of Styx's song, Mr. Roboto.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on this channel, the SLA CIC webinar. We had a lot of active tweeting that went on out there. I was doing a little bit of that myself while you were working through your slides and content, and just really appreciate you bringing the wisdom here.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people want to continue the conversation, I had up this slide, sleeb@fragaman.com. Happy to answer other questions or continue the dialogue. So again, thanks everybody for the opportunity, and thanks Derek for presenting it with me. Thanks.
Let's hope my forecast of what some of our attendees might write about your session today comes true. I'm sure it will.
Hope so. Great. Thanks much. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Great partner with you on this, brother. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
As always. Bye.